It was supposed to be a simple community visit, until Rex growled at a forgotten door. What he uncovered in that nursing home shook an entire town and brought long-buried voices back to light. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of Silver Pine's nursing home, lighting up the polished floors and quiet hallways with a gentle glow. It was the kind of place meant to feel peaceful, safe, like time had slowed just enough for people to breathe. Officer Lila Grant walked in with a smile on her face, and Rex trotting faithfully by her side. The German shepherd, all muscle and discipline, wore his canine vest proudly, his nose twitching as he took in the scents around him. They were there for a community outreach visit, just a quick demo for the residents and staff, a chance to build trust and show how dogs like Rex serve the community every day. The activities coordinator, a kind woman named Joyce with round glasses and a voice that sounded like soft music, greeted them at the front. "You've got fans waiting in the dining room," she said with a smile. "They love seeing the dog." Lila nodded, giving Rex a gentle pat. "He loves the attention," she said. And it was true. Rex, for all his training and seriousness, had a soft spot for gentle hands and warm voices. They made their way down the main hallway, passing framed photos of smiling residents, artwork from family visits, and shelves filled with books no one seemed to touch anymore. As they walked, Lila noticed Rex slow down, his head tilted slightly, ears pricking forward. She followed his gaze to an old maintenance closet tucked between two staff offices. The door was unmarked, the kind of door most people stopped noticing after a while. It had a dent near the bottom and scuff marks on the frame. Rex stopped completely in front of it. His body stiffened, tail lowered, and then he growled. Not loud, not wild, just a deep, low sound that came from somewhere deep inside his chest. Lila paused, surprised. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. Rex stepped forward and sniffed at the crack beneath the door. Then he scratched at it with one paw, gently at first, then with more insistence. His growl rumbled again, and he looked up at Lila with those sharp amber eyes. She knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back. "Easy," she whispered, but her heart had already started to beat a little faster. Joyce had turned back when she heard the noise. "Oh, that old closet," she said with a light laugh. "Nobody uses that anymore. It's probably just musty. Maybe an old mop." A nurse passing by added, "That door's been stuck for years. Not even the janitor messes with it." But Lila didn't laugh. She knew Rex, knew the difference between curiosity and concern, knew when something wasn't right. She reached for the doorknob and gave it a twist. It didn't budge. Locked. Rex scratched again, whined low in his throat, then sat back on his haunches, eyes still locked on the door, like he was waiting for it to open on its own. Lila rose to her feet slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Has anyone been in this room recently?" she asked. Joyce hesitated, then shook her head. "Not that I know of. Probably hasn't been opened in a decade." Lila's hand stayed on Rex's leash, steadying him even though he didn't move. She didn't say much after that, just continued the visit, smiled for the residents, let Rex show off his tricks. But her mind stayed on that door. Something was behind it, something Rex didn't trust. And when a dog like him doesn't trust something, neither should you. The hallways of Silver Pines were quiet by evening, the kind of quiet that felt deeper than silence. Most of the residents were tucked into bed, their doors shut, the TV room empty except for the soft murmur of an old black and white movie. Lila walked softly, her boots clicking gently on the tile floor. The lights had dimmed to night mode, casting a faint yellow glow that left long shadows dancing along the walls. Rex padded beside her, ears alert, his body close but not tense. He hadn't forgotten the door. Neither had Lila. She stopped outside the same maintenance closet they'd passed earlier. No one was around. No nurses, no staff, not even a custodian. Just her, Rex, and that door. She reached for the knob and turned. It creaked, loud and rough, but it wasn't locked. The first surprise. She opened it slowly, and the smell of dust and damp cloth met her nose. Inside was what looked like a forgotten storage space. Racks lined the left wall, filled with janitor uniforms, some faded blue, others green, all smelling like time and mildew. Buckets, brooms, and an old mop sink sat under a flickering bulb that barely lit the space. Rex walked in ahead of her, sniffing the air, tail stiff, eyes scanning. His nose led him straight to the back of the room. He whined once, then again, louder, then pawed at something hidden behind the row of hanging uniforms. Lila followed his lead, gently pushing the uniforms aside. At first, she saw nothing but wall, maybe a pipe, but when she leaned closer, she noticed a seam in the wall that didn't match the others. A line running vertically, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. She ran her fingers along the seam. The paint felt rougher here, slightly raised. Rex barked once, softly but urgent. Lila took out her flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it at the floor. The beam cut through the dust, catching small specks in the air. She crouched low, the light sliding across the tiles until it stopped. Drag marks. Thin lines in the dust, broken in places, like something heavy had been pulled across the floor. Not a single trail, but several, overlapping, disturbed only in the center. She reached out and touched one of the marks with her glove, tracing it slowly. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't old either. The dust hadn't settled completely over the scratches. Someone had been here. Maybe not last night, maybe not even last month, but not 10 years ago either. Behind her, Rex let out another whine. He nosed the panel, pushed lightly against it, and it gave just slightly, not enough to open, but enough to confirm it wasn't a solid wall. There was space behind it. Lila stood up slowly, heart beating faster now. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing behind her, but the hallway remained empty, still, like the building itself was holding its breath. She looked down at Rex, who was now sitting but still focused on the panel. His ears twitched at the smallest sounds, his body tense again. He hadn't let his guard down since they entered. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. Rex didn't move. He didn't have to. Some dogs bark, some chase, but the best ones, the ones who've seen too much and still keep going, they point you to the truth and wait for you to catch up. Lila stepped back, eyes still on the false wall. She wasn't sure what was behind it, but she was sure now that this wasn't just an old closet with forgotten uniforms. Someone had come here, someone had hidden something, and Rex had found it. The next morning, Lila sat in her squad car outside Silver Pines, the engine running low, her coffee cooling in the cup holder. Rex lay in the back seat, watching her through tired eyes, his head resting on his paws. She hadn't slept much. The false wall behind that closet had stayed in her mind all night, like a whisper she couldn't quite understand. Drag marks, a sealed panel, a dog who refused to back down. It all felt wrong. She'd trusted Rex too many times before to ignore this now. At 9 sharp, she walked into the Oakridge Town Hall, a quiet brick building with peeling paint and the smell of old paper clinging to the walls. The clerk behind the counter wore glasses low on her nose and looked up with polite curiosity as Lila approached. "I need the original blueprints for Silver Pines nursing home," Lila said. "The ones from when it first opened, not the recent copies. I want the earliest file you've got." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Looking for something in particular?" Lila hesitated, then shook her head. "Just a routine check, canine inspection, safety stuff." "Laugh it." 20 minutes later, Lila sat in a dusty records room, flipping through faded pages, while the clerk wheeled in another cart of rolled blueprints. She unrolled the third one slowly, careful not to tear the fragile edges. The ink had faded, but the layout was still clear. Main floor, patient rooms, administrative wing, kitchen, then the basement. Her finger traced the basement level. Storage, boiler room, laundry. Then she saw it. A small rectangle labeled East Treatment Room 3B. No connecting hallway. No secondary exit. It sat tucked behind the boiler room, like an afterthought. Her heart slowed. That room wasn't on the newer maps. She pulled out a current fire evacuation chart from her bag and unfolded it beside the blueprint. No east treatment room. Just blank space where the original blueprints showed walls. She checked the fire records next. The Silver Pines fire had been contained to the east wing, specifically the lower levels. Reports said the blaze was small, electrical, nobody was hurt, and damage was minimal. But after that, 3B was never reopened. No inspection reports, no repair permits. It had just been forgotten. Rex let out a small woof from behind her, tail tapping once against the metal table. He was awake now, ears tilted forward. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the blueprint. Then another of the report. She didn't know what had happened in that room, but someone had gone to a lot of trouble to erase it from memory. And if Rex's instincts were right, it hadn't stayed empty. Back in the car, Lila looked over at Rex. "How do you always know where to look?" she whispered. He didn't answer, of course, just blinked slowly, like he was waiting for her to catch up again. That night, she pinned the blueprint to her kitchen wall and stared at it under the glow of a single lamp. A sealed room, a forgotten fire, and a false wall. None of it made sense yet. But one thing was clear. That room wasn't just sealed off from the basement. It had been sealed off from the truth. And somehow, Rex had found the scent of it buried beneath years of silence. The apartment was quiet, but Rex wasn't resting. He twitched in his sleep, legs kicking like he was running in place, a soft growl building low in his throat. Lila watched from the kitchen, leaning against the doorway with a dish towel in her hand. She hadn't seen him like this in a long time. Not since his last search and rescue case, the one that left him limping for weeks and silent for even longer. She stepped closer, crouched down beside him, and gently laid a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. But the words didn't seem to reach him. His breathing was shallow, ears pinned back, chest rising too fast. Then he barked, sharp and sudden, startling them both. He woke with a jolt, eyes wide. The room reflected in them like a memory he hadn't let go of. He stood and walked in circles before lying back down, head resting near the edge of the coffee table. Lila followed his gaze and saw what had calmed him. The folder. It sat on the corner of the table, marked with the words Silver Pines, Original Records. She reached for it slowly, opened the flap, and flipped through the photos and printouts. When she paused at the blueprint with the forgotten room in the basement, Rex let out a quiet huff, like his chest had loosened. His body relaxed a little, and the tremble in his back legs stopped. "You want to go back?" she said. It wasn't a question. An hour later, the nursing home was dark, the front gates locked. But Lila wasn't new to quiet places after hours, and her badge gave her more reach than most. With a nod from the night guard, an old friend from the academy, she and Rex were let in through the back. They moved like shadows, her flashlight off, relying on the soft red glow of emergency lights lining the halls. The deeper they walked, the heavier the air became. The scent of bleach faded, replaced by something older, mold, rust, dust that clung to the corners like it had roots. The basement door groaned as she opened it, and the stairwell creaked beneath their steps. Rex led the way, nose twitching, ears flicking at every sound. At the bottom, the hallway was colder, lit only by a few flickering bulbs overhead. It felt like the place had been waiting. Lila kept close to the wall, her free hand brushing against cracked paint. Ahead of her, Rex stopped. He turned left, past the boiler room, and headed for the far wall. It was empty, plain, nothing but pipes and flaking tile. But Rex stared at it like it had eyes. He stepped forward and pressed his nose to the surface. He whined once, then pawed at the wall. Lila knelt down beside him, ran her hand across the surface. Cold, damp. And something else, a draft, faint but real, coming from a crack near the baseboard. She pulled out her flashlight, and shined it along the floor. The beam caught a thin line in the wall, almost invisible, but straight and deliberate. Rex scratched again, harder this time. He wasn't curious. He was sure. Lila sat back on her heels, heart thudding. This wasn't a storage closet or some forgotten corner. It was something else, something hidden. She didn't know what was behind that wall, but she knew why they were here. Because Rex had known all along. Lila stood beside the wall again the next morning, sunlight barely reaching the basement steps. She'd called in a favor, Tommy Kane, a retired contractor who owed her from a case they'd solved years ago. He arrived with a toolbox in one hand and a raised eyebrow. "You sure this is about plumbing?" he asked, smirking as he set his tools down. "Leaky pipes," Lila said dryly, handing him a forged work order signed off by the city inspector. Completely legal. Mostly. Tommy laughed and got to work, tapping on the wall with the handle of a wrench. "That's not concrete behind there," he said after a minute. "It's drywall. Someone didn't want this found, but they didn't build it to last." Rex sat quietly nearby, eyes never leaving the wall. Every few seconds, his ears would twitch at a creak or a distant hum of the boiler, but his body stayed pointed toward the wall like a compass. It took less than an hour for Tommy to break through the false panel. The drywall crumbled under steady hands, falling away in large, dusty chunks. The smell that came out hit hard. Stale air mixed with mildew, the kind that settles deep into old wood and forgotten furniture. Lila pulled her shirt over her nose as Rex stood, tail stiff, eyes locked on the opening. Tommy stepped back, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Well," he muttered, "there's your leak." Lila stepped inside first, flashlight cutting a soft cone of light through the shadows. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet. Cobwebs clung to the corners, dust thick enough to dull the color of everything inside. Against the far wall sat a single rusted bed frame, the mattress long gone. Next to it was a wooden chair, broken at one leg. But in the center of the room was what made her stop cold. A wheelchair. It stood perfectly upright, the kind with old leather straps on the arms, the seat worn and cracked. It hadn't been used recently, but it hadn't been touched in years either. Dust blanketed everything, but there was something in the air, like the room had been sealed too well, kept too still, too preserved. Rex stepped past her and began sniffing. His movements were fast now, almost frantic, like he recognized something in the smell. He went straight to the far corner where a crumbling bookshelf leaned against the wall. It looked like it hadn't held books in a decade, just warped paper and broken bindings. But Rex didn't stop at the shelf. He dropped low, nose to the ground, and began to paw. Lila crossed the room quickly and knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Rex dug faster now, claws scraping against wood, then something harder. The dust swirled up around them, and then she saw it, a metal edge, barely showing through the floorboards. She reached out, cleared more away with her hands, and uncovered a square metal lockbox. Old, dented, but still shut tight. Tommy whistled low from the doorway. "What the hell is that doing here?" Lila didn't answer. Her fingers brushed across the top of the box, and she felt it. Raised letters, worn but still there. She read them out loud, barely above a whisper. "Property of East Treatment Wing." Rex let out a sharp bark, then sat down beside her, still watching the box. Whatever had been hidden in that room, whatever someone wanted to keep sealed off and forgotten, they hadn't counted on a dog with a nose for the truth. And now, the box was open to the light. The lockbox creaked when Lila pried it open, the metal hinges stiff with rust and age. Dust puffed up into the air, making her cough. Rex stood close, head hovering just above the rim of the box, sniffing the contents like he already knew what was coming. Inside were papers folded into soft corners, envelopes yellowed with time, and photographs curled from years of being kept in the dark. Lila reached in carefully, lifting the top letter. The ink faded but still legible. It was dated July 14, 2012. The handwriting was tight, nervous but neat. It talked about a patient named Rebecca M., someone who'd been admitted for early-onset memory loss, but who, according to the letter, had begun to show improvement. The writer was a nurse, someone named Ellie J., and the letter read more like a confession than a report. There were lines about unusual treatments, about silence from management, about patients being moved without notice. Lila's hands stilled as she pulled out the photo underneath. A woman, maybe in her 60s, sat in a sunlit chair in what looked like the garden outside Silver Pines. She had short gray hair, sharp eyes, and a soft smile. The back of the photo was marked in red pen, Rebecca M., last seen September 9th, 2012. Lila frowned. She had gone through the digital records just the day before. Rebecca M. had been marked as discharged in early September of that year. Sent home, file closed, no forwarding information. But the tone of that letter, the worried shape of those words, said otherwise. She reached further into the box and found a ring of old keys. Most were standard issue. Maintenance, closets, maybe basement doors. But one stood out. Heavier, brass, with a dull silver tag barely hanging on. The tag read, in faded black letters, Storage RM B12, do not enter. Rex let out a low growl. It wasn't aggressive, not even loud, but it was full of warning. His ears pinned slightly, and he stared at the key like it was something alive. Lila sat back on her heels, the key in one hand, the photo in the other. A familiar knot twisted in her stomach. She'd felt it before on other cases, the moment when curiosity turned to dread. When missing pieces started to fall into place, and you realized the puzzle was bigger than anyone expected. She laid the items gently back into the box and looked at Rex. Rebecca didn't go home, did she? The dog didn't bark. He didn't have to. Whatever happened in that nursing home 12 years ago hadn't been an accident, and it hadn't been forgotten. The fire, the sealed room, the erased names in the system, someone had tried to bury it all. Not just records, but people. And now, standing in a room that shouldn't exist, with evidence that was never meant to be found, Lila realized they weren't just uncovering a mistake. They were waking up a secret someone had spent years trying to keep dead and buried. Rex stepped forward, nudging the key with his nose. Lila picked it up and slid it into her pocket. "All right," she whispered, voice tight, heart heavy. "Let's find room B12. The town archive building sat at the edge of Oakridge, hidden behind the library and shaded by tall pine trees that creaked when the wind picked up. Lila parked beneath one of them, engine still humming, as Rex stretched out in the back seat, watching her with quiet eyes. He didn't like being left behind, not when the scent of the nursing home still lingered on her jacket. "I won't be long," she promised, scratching behind his ear. "Just paperwork, no shadows today." The inside of the archive was colder than she expected, the air thick with dust and the smell of old glue. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, and boxes stacked high on metal shelves made the place feel more like a forgotten storage room than a working office. Lila showed her badge to the clerk, a thin man with glasses too large for his face. "I'm looking for records on Silver Pines nursing home," she said. "Original employee files, patient logs, anything from before 2015. He nodded, moving slow, and returned with 3 boxes. Lila carried them to a nearby table and started sorting. Most of it was routine, admission records, facility inspections, shift schedules. But one box was labeled under a different name entirely: Oakridge Convalescent Center. The address matched Silver Pines. Same lot, same property line. She narrowed her eyes and opened the box. Inside was a battered leather-bound logbook, the kind nurses used to jot down notes during shifts. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but the writing was still clear. Lila flipped to the first few pages. The entries were calm and ordinary. Notes about meal plans, medication times, bedtime routines. But around the middle of the book, something changed. She paused at a page dated August 2012. Patient transferred without escort. No family notice. Told to mark as discharged in the system. The next entry, same handwriting. New section opening in lower east wing. Called a silent ward. No clear purpose given. Staff rotation limited. Only Dr. Trask has full access. Lila read faster now, turning the pages with a growing sense of unease. Entry after entry mentioned patients being moved with no explanation. Some were listed under different names after the move. Others disappeared entirely. And always, the same signature appeared at the bottom of the forms. Dr. Alden Trask. The name meant nothing to her at first. She jotted it down, then asked the clerk for anything else with that name. He came back 10 minutes later holding a slim file. Trask had been the medical director at Silver Pines from 2008 to 2013. Retired early. Died of a heart attack 6 months after leaving. No family, no obituary. Just a quiet exit. Lila looked at the nurse's logbook again. So many lines ended the same way. Patient status? Closed. Transfer complete. Do not follow up. Records moved to private storage. She ran her finger over the last page, where a final note had been scribbled in shaky handwriting. I don't know what's happening in the silent wing, but something's wrong. Patients don't come back, and no one talks about Rebecca. Rex was waiting at the door when she stepped outside, nose pressed to the glass. She slid into the driver's seat, heart pounding. They buried the truth, she said softly, looking out at the trees. And they signed it with the same hand every time. Rex shifted in his seat, eyes locked on hers, like he already knew what she was going to do next. Go back. Find room but 12, because there were still voices waiting to be heard. And one of them was named Rebecca. The sun had just started to rise. When Lila returned to Silver Pines, the morning light spilling over the back garden like warm paint. Dew clung to the blades of grass, and the air smelled like earth and old flowers. It should have felt peaceful, but Lila's grip on the key in her jacket pocket said otherwise. The tag still read, Storage RM B12. Do not enter. The edges worn, the letters faded, but clear enough to point her here. Behind the garden beds, past the trellis of dying roses, and the stone bench where residents used to sit, was a shed. It leaned slightly to the left, its roof patched with tin, and ivy climbing up its sides like fingers trying to hold it down. No one had touched it in years. The lock was rusted shut, but a firm tug broke it loose. Inside were garden tools, a broken wheelbarrow, and crates of fertilizer long expired. Nothing screamed secret room or forgotten patients. But Rex didn't wait for her to dig through the junk. He sniffed once, then darted to the far corner of the shed, where the dirt met the wall. His nose went straight to the ground, tail stiff, ears high. He started to dig. At first, it was just dirt. Then chunks of broken stone came up, bits of tile, old bricks. Lila dropped to her knees, helping him clear the soil. Within minutes, her gloves were filthy, her arms scratched, but they were getting somewhere. A metallic clang echoed beneath her hands as she hit something solid. She scraped away more and revealed it. A rusted metal panel, flat against the ground. A door. She sat back on her heels, breathing hard. "You've got to be kidding me!" she whispered. The door had no handle, just thick bolts sealed tight, and the faint outline of hinges buried in the corners. Rex barked once, not loud, but firm. He stood beside the panel, nose twitching, body still. She called in the fire department, gave them enough to get them moving without too many questions. When the truck rolled in an hour later, the crew brought cutting tools, crowbars, and a kind of cautious curiosity. It took 3 of them to pry the bolts loose. The metal screamed when it finally gave way. What lay beneath was a tunnel. The opening was barely 4 feet wide, lined with brick and dust. A steep staircase leading down into blackness. The air that rushed up was cold and sharp, tinged with mold and something older, like rotting books and hospital bleach. One of the firefighters leaned over and shined his light into the dark. Where does it go? Lila looked at the map in her mind, the one she'd memorized from the old blueprints. It leads back under Silver Pines, she said. Back to the east wing. Rex didn't wait for permission. He stepped onto the first stair, careful, steady, his paws silent against the stone. He looked back once, not as a question, but as a command. Lila followed, heart pounding, the flashlight trembling in her grip. She wasn't sure what they'd find down there, but one thing was certain now. Room B12 wasn't just behind a wall. It was beneath the roots of this place, buried like a secret someone was hoping would never be found. But Rex had found it, and he wasn't turning back. The tunnel swallowed sound as soon as Lila and Rex stepped inside. The stone walls absorbed their footsteps, the dim beam of her flashlight barely stretching more than a few feet ahead. The air grew colder with every step, thick with dust, and the sharp, dry scent of mildew. Overhead, old wires dangled like vines, some frayed, others cut clean. Rex moved ahead slowly, his paws silent, nose twitching at every breath of stale air. The passage turned left, then dipped slightly. At the end of the curve stood a metal door, the kind used in basements to keep fire or water from spreading. Lila pushed it open with both hands, the hinges groaning under years of rust. The space beyond opened into a room she hadn't expected. It was wide, low-ceilinged, and filled with metal filing cabinets, rows of them, dusty and dented. Cardboard boxes leaned against the walls, some collapsed from damp air, others holding strong like they'd been waiting. There were no chairs, no desks, just storage, endless, silent storage. Lila moved toward the nearest cabinet and opened it. Inside were files, labeled in block letters, some faded, others still crisp. She pulled one out and flipped it open. A patient profile. No photo, just a name and a date of birth. The diagnosis was vague. Treatment history was marked provisional. The last page had a red stamp across it. Redacted. She opened another. This one had a picture. An elderly man, eyes wide, face slack. The file ended with the same stamp, confidential. A third file was blackened at the edges, like it had nearly burned before being tossed in here. The ink was still legible in places. It mentioned sedatives, restraint use, memory testing. Rex let out a short bark from the corner of the room. Lila turned and followed the sound. He was nosing at a half-open box beneath one of the shelves. She crouched beside him and peeled back the flaps. Inside were personal belongings, things that should have gone home with families, things that shouldn't be hidden in a tunnel. There was a knitted scarf, stained with time, a set of reading glasses in a cracked leather case, and at the bottom, wrapped in a yellowing handkerchief, was a silver locket. Lila held it up to the light. It was scratched and dull, but when she wiped it clean with her thumb, a name was faintly visible inside. Not a full name, just initials, carved by hand into the back. C.W. She paused. Those were the initials of Charles Whitmore, the former assistant director of Silver Pines, the one who had resigned right after the 2012 fire and disappeared from public view. No forwarding address, no retirement notice, just gone. Inside the locket was a photo, so small she had to squint. It showed a woman smiling in a wheelchair, short gray hair, sharp eyes. Rebecca M. Lila's hand tightened around the locket. They had hidden everything. Not just records, not just names. They had buried the people too, their voices, their belongings, even their memories. But now the tunnel was open, and the files were breathing again. Rex stood beside her, still watching, still waiting, like he knew they weren't done yet. Because this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about justice. The news broke late in the afternoon. A quiet leak at first, just a few lines in the local paper and a photo of the rusted door beneath the garden, but it spread quickly. By nightfall, the town of Oakridge was buzzing. Words like investigation and misconduct floated through every corner of the nursing home and beyond. People started asking questions they hadn't dared to before. Lila sat at her desk, The lockbox opened beside her, the silver locket still resting on a cloth. Rex lay under the table, calm but alert, as if waiting for the next step. She was going over one of the burnt files again when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was soft, uncertain. "My name is Joan Keller. I used to work at Silver Pines. I think I have something to say." They met the next morning in the back corner of the town library. Joan was small, with white hair pulled into a bun and hands that trembled slightly even when they were still. Her eyes were tired, but there was something steady behind them, something that had waited too long to speak. "I was a nurse there for over 20 years, she said. "Started back when it was still called Oakridge Convalescent. I left just before the fire. I knew something bad was happening, but I didn't know how deep it went." Lila listened carefully, not interrupting. Joan opened a small notebook and laid it flat on the table. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, dates, initials, short notes, like someone trying to remember what the world wanted to forget. "They started calling it experimental therapy," Joan said. "Said it was for patients who didn't respond to regular treatment. Mostly folks with memory loss, confusion, aggression. The ones who didn't have family visiting much. The idea was to lower their response to triggers, calm the mind. But it was never approved. Never tested the way it should have been." Lila flipped through one of the pages. Rebecca M's name was listed more than once. "She was sweet," Joan said quietly. "Sharp, too. She had bad days, like all of them did, but she always remembered her son's name. She wore that locket every day. Then, one night, they moved her. Said it was temporary. Just a trial. I wasn't allowed to see her again." "What happened to her?" Lila asked. Joan looked away for a long moment. "I don't know for sure, but the night of the fire, there was screaming in the East Wing. I tried to go down there, but Dr. Trask stopped me. Told me everything was under control. The next day, Rebecca's name was gone from the system. Her room cleaned out. No file. No forwarding info. They told me she'd been transferred. But I knew." She closed the notebook and pushed it toward Lila. "They faked deaths. Covered them up. Called it medical error or natural decline. But not everyone went peacefully. And not everyone left that hidden room." Rex shifted under the table, his ears twitching. Lila felt the weight of the truth settle in her chest, heavy and sharp. The puzzle was no longer scattered. It was real now. Names had faces, stories, losses. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked gently. Joan's eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't break. "Because someone needs to listen. And that dog." She looked down at Rex, who had lifted his head and was watching her carefully. He remembered what we were supposed to forget. And finally, the silence began to lift. The morning was gray and still when the state investigators arrived at Silver Pines. Black vans pulled up, one after another, marked with official seals and quiet authority. Reporters stood just outside the gates, cameras rolling, microphones ready. But the real story wasn't in their hands. It was buried beneath the garden, sealed behind a false wall, and carried in the quiet eyes of a dog who had never stopped searching. Rex stood beside Lila as the officials opened the old tunnel entrance. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply watched, his head lowered slightly, tail still, like he understood what was happening. The world had finally listened. It started with Lila's report, detailed and backed by evidence, photos, files, handwritten notes, the locket, and Joan Keller's statement. Then came the nurse's logbook, the records recovered from the tunnel, and finally the fire department's documentation of the sealed metal door beneath the shed. One by one, pieces of the truth were laid out, no longer hidden in shadows. The state called it a historical abuse case, but it was more than that. It was a reckoning. A quiet place that once held whispers and silence was now echoing with names, real names, of people who had vanished into paperwork and lies. The investigation spread fast. Old employees were tracked down. Some denied knowledge. Others, faced with the proof, finally spoke. The media clung to every headline. Hidden room beneath nursing home. Dozens of patient files uncovered. Former director linked to forged deaths. And the one that stuck more than all the others. Canine hero uncovers secret that rocked the state. They called Rex the truth sniffer. He didn't care for the attention. He never had. But when the time came, and the door to the hidden room was opened again, he was there. Lila stood with him, one hand resting gently on his back. Officials moved carefully, their voices low. They removed boxes first, documents, belongings, tags. Then came the remains, each handled with care, each placed into a body bag not as a number, but as a person. Rebecca M. was among them, identified by the initials in her locket, matched to her old photos, and finally, by the notes she had once left behind in a forgotten envelope marked for her son. Families began to come forward. Some had believed the lies. Others had long suspected something wasn't right. Now they had proof. Names were cleared. Death certificates were corrected. Silence was replaced with ceremony. A memorial was planned at the edge of the garden, just beyond the trellis. There would be flowers, plaques, and stories shared aloud instead of buried deep. Lila was asked to speak. She declined. But she and Rex stood near the front, close enough to be seen, far enough to stay quiet. As the last bag was carried up the stairs and into the sunlight, Rex stepped forward. He stood at the edge of the doorway, his head lowered, tail still. He didn't move until the last official passed by. Then he let out a soft, slow breath, like he had been holding it for years. Justice had come, not fast, not loud, but steady. And it started with a dog who never forgot. The seasons turned slowly in Oakridge, and by the time spring returned, Silver Pines had changed. The old brick building still stood, but its windows were new, its paint fresh, and the shadows that once clung to its corners seemed to have lifted. Under new ownership, the facility was being rebuilt, not just in walls and floors, but in purpose. Gone were the locked doors and false records. In their place came light, open spaces, and a promise that silence would no longer hide the truth. At the far edge of the grounds, beyond the trellis and the newly planted flower beds, stood the memorial garden. A stone path wound through rows of soft grass and young trees, leading to a circle of benches and a low granite monument. Etched into its surface were 17 names, first names, last names, initials where full names could not be found. Each one belonged to someone who had once lived inside these walls and whose story had been hidden too long. Rex visited every week with Lila. He was slower now, not quite retired, but no longer chasing shadows or crawling through tunnels. His body bore the marks of years in service, scars beneath his fur, a limp on colder mornings, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, steady, searching. Always searching. Lila would sit on one of the benches with her coffee, watching as Rex made his quiet rounds. He never rushed. He would walk the path, pause at the monument, sniff the corners of the flower beds, and then, most days, just before the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, he would turn toward the far end of the garden. There, half hidden by vines and ivy, was the spot where the shed used to stand. The tunnel entrance had been sealed after the investigation, the door reinforced, locked, and buried again under a layer of earth and stone. But Rex remembered. He would walk there, slowly, his tail low and his ears forward. He would sit at the edge of the old path, where the earth still held the scent of what was once hidden, and he would wait. Not for long, just a few minutes, long enough for Lila to notice, long enough for the wind to shift through the trees, and long enough for anyone watching to know that the past was not forgotten. Because Rex didn't come here for praise or medals. He didn't need a title or applause. He came for the ones who couldn't leave on their own. For Rebecca, for the others, for the voices that had been buried beneath stone and silence. When the sun finally touched the horizon, he would stand, shake off the dust, and walk back to Lila's side. She'd give him a scratch behind the ears, whisper something only he could hear, and they'd head home. Some dogs chase criminals, some sniff out danger, but a rare few, like Rex, remember the ones the world tried to erase. And that kind of memory, that kind of loyalty, never fades. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you like this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.